The Persian Gulf at 11:43 p.m. had no moon. That absence was not incidental. The Mohajer 6 drone's operational planning cycle, as documented in 5th Fleet's intelligence assessment of IRGCN unmanned aerial system activity in the Gulf, factored lunar phase into its operational timing the way commercial shipping factored tidal windows. A moonless night in the Persian Gulf provided the specific conditions that the Mohajer 6's sensor package was optimized for. Thermal imaging against a thermally uniform surface with human visual acuity degraded and artificial illumination required to compensate. The drone's own electro-optical/infrared sensor operated more effectively in no-moon conditions than in moonlit conditions, because the contrast between a warm vessel hull and the cooler night sea was sharper in complete darkness than in partial moonlight. The IRGCN had chosen the phase. The U.S. destroyer had been conducting a presence operation in the northern Persian Gulf since 1800. 8 hours into the watch, the bridge team had sustained the elevated awareness that the northern Gulf required at night. The waters between the Farsi Island and Karg Island IRGCN operational areas were historically active after midnight. The watch officer had logged the specific notation at 2300. Northern Gulf, post-midnight hours, elevated readiness posture maintained. At 11:43 p.m., the EW operator reported an anomaly. Not a surface contact. Not an airborne contact on the air picture. Not yet. What the EW operator reported was an emission, a specific frequency signature in the L band that was consistent with the downlink telemetry of an unmanned aerial system, received at a bearing of approximately 028 from the direction of the Iranian coastline 23 nautical miles to the north. Bridge CIC. EW contact. I'm reading a UAV datalink emission bearing 028. Range estimate unclear. This is a telemetry downlink, not a radar. The emission profile is consistent with Mohajer-class UAV datalink. I cannot give a precise range, but the signal strength suggests the platform is between 10 and 20 nautical miles on a bearing from the IRGCN Karg Island operational area. I am tracking the emission, a UAV telemetry downlink. Mohajer class profile from the IRGCN's Northern Gulf operating area. At 11:43 p.m. on a moonless night, the EW contact was not a radar contact, not a visual contact, not an AIS signal. It was the UAV communicating with its control station, the specific radio emission that every drone produced when it was flying and reporting back to its operators. The emission meant the drone was airborne. Its precise position was not yet determined, but the bearing and the profile and the timing meant one thing. The Mohajer was already up, and it was already looking. The officer of the deck reached for the intercom. At 11:44 p.m., the captain stepped onto the bridge. He looked at the EW display first, the bearing, the emission profile, the signal strength estimate. Then, the air picture. Nothing on radar yet. Then, the surface picture, standard Northern Gulf distribution, no unusual contacts. Then, through the bridge windows, complete darkness. The moonless Persian Gulf, at 11:44 p.m., was an absence of light that was total and consistent, broken only by the destroyer's own navigation lights and the distant red glow of gas flares from the Iranian oil platforms 18 nautical miles to the north. I have the con. He had read the Mohajer 6 capability assessment. The Mohajer 6 was not the Mohajer 2 that had been used in earlier Gulf encounters. It was a more capable platform, equipped with an electro-optical sensor in the visible and infrared spectrum, capable of 200-kilometer range, capable of loiter times up to 12 hours, and fitted with a laser rangefinder that allowed its operators to generate precise geolocation data on surface vessels. The geolocation capability was the specific operational concern at 11:43 p.m. A Mohajer 6 at altitude in the dark over the northern Persian Gulf, laser ranging the destroyer, could generate targeting coordinates with sufficient precision to support the kind of engagement that the IRGCN had demonstrated capability for in other operational contexts. The drone was not a weapon. The drone was a targeting and intelligence platform. But the targeting data it was producing, if it was producing targeting data, was the preliminary step in a threat sequence. CIC bridge. I need range on that UAV. Cross-reference the EW bearing with any passive acoustic data. If the Mohajer is at altitude, it should be producing propeller noise that the passive acoustic suite might detect at range. The acoustic cross-reference was an unconventional approach. The destroyer's acoustic systems were primarily oriented toward underwater contacts, but an unmanned aerial system operating a gasoline piston engine at altitude produced broadband acoustic energy that, under the right atmospheric conditions, the Persian Gulf at 11:44 p.m. was calm, which improved sound propagation, might produce a detectable signal in the passive acoustic receivers. The acoustic operator reported at 11:46 p.m. Bridge CIC. I have a possible acoustic signature at bearing 028, consistent with a small internal combustion engine at altitude. Signal is extremely faint. This is not a confirmed contact. It's below my normal classification threshold. I'm estimating the source is at a range between 12 and 18 nautical miles based on signal attenuation, and altitude is estimated between 1,000 and 3,000 feet. Acoustic cross-reference, bearing 028, range 12 to 18 nautical miles, altitude 1,000 to 3,000 feet. The EW bearing and the acoustic bearing matched. The triangulation was crude but consistent. The Mohajer was northeast of the destroyer, at altitude, in the range bracket consistent with its operational parameters. At 11:46 p.m., the first radar contact appeared on the air picture. Bridge CIC. Air contact bearing 031, range 16.8 nautical miles, altitude approximately 1,800 feet. This is a small target radar cross-section consistent with a UAV platform. Contact is slow. I estimate 80 to 100 knots. Contact is on a direct approach heading. Time to our position at current speed, approximately 10 minutes. 16.8 nautical miles, 80 to 100 knots, 10 minutes. EW bearing 028, radar bearing 031. Close convergence. The drone that the EW suite had detected via telemetry at 11:43 p.m. was the same drone now showing on radar. It had been operating at 16 plus nautical miles when the EW operator first detected it. It was approaching. CPA to UAV at current track, approximately overhead or close overhead at the destroyer's current position. At 11:47 p.m., the FLIR operator attempted to acquire the drone thermally. Bridge CIC. FLIR slave to the air contact bearing. At 16.5 nautical miles, I'm getting a faint return at altitude, consistent with the thermal signature of a small piston engine at 1,800 feet. The Mohajer 6's engine generates approximately 100 horsepower. At this range, I'm getting intermittent thermal contact. I cannot confirm configuration or sensor status at this range. Intermittent thermal at 16.5 nautical miles. The FLIR was working. The Persian Gulf night was thermally cooperative, the moonless darkness providing the contrast the infrared sensor needed. But 16.5 nautical miles was near the edge of effective FLIR range for a small platform, and the contact was intermittent. At 11:47 p.m., the captain authorized the Seahawk for launch. The Seahawk's role in this encounter was different from any surface standoff. The drone was at altitude. The Seahawk was also a rotary wing aircraft. It could reach altitude, it could intercept the drone's approach path, and at 400 to 600 feet, it occupied the same general airspace as a Mohajer 6 descending for a closer observation pass. A helicopter in the drone's approach path, with its own thermal signature and its own downward-looking camera, created a specific tactical dynamic. The drone's operators, looking through their electro-optical sensor, would see a U.S. Navy helicopter in their approach path before they could see the destroyer through the helicopter. Free. Seahawk. Launch. Climb to 600 feet. Intercept the UAV's approach bearing 031 from our position. You are looking for a small, slow contact at approximately 1,800 feet, 80 to 100 knots. Your searchlight is armed. I want to illuminate the drone if you can close to visual range. Position yourself between the drone and our position. The Seahawk launched at 11:48 p.m. CPA to UAV 8 minutes. At 11:49 p.m., the LRAD activated. directed toward bearing 031 at 15 nautical miles on the UAV's approach bearing. The LRAD broadcast in Farsi, Iranian unmanned aerial vehicle approaching from bearing 031. This is a United States Navy warship in international waters of the Persian Gulf. You are operating an unmanned aircraft that is approaching our vessel. Your aircraft has been detected by radar, electronic warfare systems, and thermal imaging. This approach is being documented and transmitted to 5th Fleet Command. Cease your approach and withdraw your unmanned aircraft from our vicinity. The broadcast was in Farsi because the drone's control station was monitoring radio frequencies near the operating frequency of the Mohajer 6's datalink. The LRAD directed at the drone's bearing would be received by any monitoring system along that bearing line, including the control station operators who are managing the Mohajer's flight. At 11:50 p.m., the EW operator reported a change in the telemetry signal. Bridge CIC. Mohajer telemetry signal has changed character. The datalink is now showing a higher data rate, consistent with a video transmission mode rather than a standard telemetry mode. The drone has activated its electro-optical sensor for video downlink. They are now watching us. High data rate. Video downlink. The drone's operators had activated its imaging system and were transmitting real-time video to the control station. The Mohajer was not just approaching, it was actively collecting. Whatever the destroyer's topside looked like in the Mohajer's EO sensor at 14 nautical miles on a moonless night, that image was now being transmitted to an IRGCN facility. CPA to UAV 7 minutes. At 11:51 p.m., the first friction event arrived. The Seahawk pilot's first report, Bridge Seahawk. I'm at 600 feet bearing 031 from you at 2.1 nautical miles. I have a very faint infrared return ahead, too far to confirm visually. In the moonless conditions, I have essentially zero visual range beyond what my searchlight illuminates. I am operating on radar and thermal. The contact is at approximately 12 nautical miles from you at this moment. I need to close significantly to have any chance of visual or searchlight contact. Requesting authorization to climb to 1,500 feet and proceed northeast on bearing 031 toward the contact. 1,500 feet and proceed northeast. The Seahawk pilot was asking to leave the destroyer's vicinity and actively intercept the drone's approach. The intercept would place the helicopter between the drone and the destroyer at a range of 6 to 8 nautical miles from the destroyer. The captain authorized it. Seahawk, climb to 1,500 feet. Proceed northeast on bearing 031, close to visual or searchlight range of the UAV. I want you to illuminate that drone. The Seahawk climbed and accelerated northeast. CPA to UAV 6 minutes. At 11:52 p.m., the second friction event arrived. The FLIR operator reported, Bridge CIC. I have a second EW emission bearing 015, different frequency from the Mohajer telemetry, but consistent with a second UAV datalink. Bearing 015 is separated from the primary contact bearing by approximately 16 degrees. If this is a second drone, it is approaching from a slightly different bearing. A second drone. The specific tactical geometry that the IRGCN had used in the daytime encounter in script number 4, multiple unmanned aerial systems approaching from different angles, was now being executed at night in the moonless Persian Gulf, with the specific advantage that the night provided. The FLIR was the only identification sensor, and it was operating at its effective limit. CIC bridge. Track both EW contacts. Get me the second one on radar. At 11:53 p.m., the second radar contact appeared on the air picture. Bearing 014, range 18.3 nautical miles. Altitude approximately 1,600 feet, speed 85 knots. A second Mohajer-class contact. 2 drones. 2 approach bearings. The primary at bearing 031, now at 11.2 nautical miles and closing. The secondary at bearing 014, 18.3 nautical miles. CPA to primary UAV 5 minutes. At 11:53 p.m., the captain activated the ship's laser Dazzler system, the directed energy device designed to saturate optical and electro-optical sensors with a return pulse that degraded their imaging capability. The Dazzler was directed toward the primary UAV's bearing at 11.2 nautical miles. At 11.2 nautical miles, the laser Dazzler's effective range for electro-optical sensor degradation was at the margin of its design specifications. The Mohajer 6's sensor was operating at close to its maximum range for useful imagery. The Dazzler's beam, projected toward bearing 031 at altitude, would enter the angular field that the Mohajer's sensor was looking through if the geometry was correctly aligned. The EW operator. I'm watching the telemetry data rate, watching for a change in the video transmission that would indicate sensor degradation. CPA to primary UAV, 4 minutes 30 seconds. At 11:54 p.m., the Seahawk pilot reported, "Bridge, Seahawk. I am at 1,500 feet, bearing 031 from you at 6.8 nautical miles. I have a definite thermal contact ahead. I estimate 5.4 nautical miles, altitude approximately 1,800 feet. This is a small heat source consistent with a piston engine at altitude. I am closing. I will be at Searchlight range in approximately 2 minutes. 2 minutes. The drone was 4 minutes from the destroyer. The Seahawk was 2 minutes from Searchlight range on the drone. At 11:55 p.m., the EW operator reported, "Bridge, CIC. Primary drone telemetry data rate has dropped. Not ceased, dropped. From approximately 2 megabits per second to approximately 800 kilobits per second. This is consistent with a sensor degradation event. The video downlink has reduced in quality. I cannot confirm causation, but the timing correlates with the Dazzler activation. Data rate dropped. Potential Dazzler effect. The Mohajer's operators were receiving lower quality video. CPA to primary UAV 3 minutes. At 11:55:30 p.m., the Seahawk pilot reported, "Bridge, Seahawk. I have visual acquisition. I can see the drone's navigation lights at approximately 4.9 nautical miles. It's small, I can see a red nav light. I am activating Searchlight." The Seahawk's Searchlight activated at 11:55:35 p.m. At 4.9 nautical miles, the 2.5 million candela Searchlight's beam crossed the distance to the Mohajer in approximately 0.016 seconds. From the Mohajer's electro-optical sensor's perspective, a 2.5 million candela point source appeared directly in its field of view from a bearing below and ahead. At 11:55:45 p.m., the EW operator. Primary drone telemetry data rate has dropped to approximately 200 kilobits per second. This is consistent with severe optical saturation of the imaging sensor. The drone's video downlink is essentially non-functional at this data rate. Non-functional video downlink. The Mohajer's operators in the IRGCN control station were now receiving a blank or saturated feed instead of the imagery they had been collecting. The drone was still airborne. It was still approaching, but its primary collection capability was blinded. The TEL appeared at 11:56 p.m. The primary drone altered course. Not by much, 15 degrees to the east, visible on the radar display as a gradual bearing drift from 031 to 046. The course change moved the drone's track away from the destroyer's position. The CPA projection, which had been converging on the destroyer, shifted eastward, from near overhead to approximately 1.8 nautical miles east of the destroyer. 1.8 nautical miles. The drone had altered course by 15 degrees. Its optical sensor was saturated. Its video downlink was degraded, and it was no longer approaching the destroyer directly. CPA to primary UAV revised. 1.8 nautical miles, no longer overhead. The blink came in 3 layers. On the EW display, primary drone data link shifting to low-power telemetry mode, the Mohajer was reducing its transmissions, consistent with a drone transitioning from active collection to return to base mode. Then radar, the drone's speed decreasing from 85 knots to 60 knots, and its bearing stabilizing on a heading that was taking it back northeast toward the Karg Island area. Then, the secondary drone, bearing 014 contact, had not closed. It had maintained its range at 16 nautical miles throughout, apparently holding position as an observation asset while the primary had been the approach contact. At 11:57 p.m., the secondary contact also began bearing drift to the east, consistent with withdrawal. Both drones withdrawing. The laser Dazzler was secured at 11:58 p.m. The Seahawk secured its searchlight and began the return to the destroyer, descending from 1,500 feet to the standard recovery altitude. By 12:04 a.m., both drone contacts were at 22 plus nautical miles and continuing to open toward the Iranian coastline. The EW operator logged the telemetry signals as decreasing in strength. The drones were at range and their data links were reducing in power as they returned to the operating area. No one on the bridge spoke for a long moment after the secondary contact passed 20 nautical miles. The FLAR operator had been tracking both contacts through the encounter. He completed his contact log at 12:06 a.m. Primary contact first detected thermally at 16.5 nautical miles. Confirmed visually by Seahawk at 4.9 nautical miles. Last thermal contact at 22.4 nautical miles on withdrawal track. Secondary contact detected EW only. Never achieved sufficient radar cross-section for independent thermal confirmation. Both contacts confirmed as UAV platforms by emission profile and acoustic cross-reference. The acoustic cross-reference. The crew member who had provided the acoustic bearing at 11:46 p.m., the acoustic operator who had found a faint internal combustion engine signature at altitude in the passive suite's data, had contributed the piece that allowed the triangulated position estimate before the radar contact appeared. It was unconventional use of a system designed for underwater contacts. It had worked. The helmsman had held course through the encounter. The moonless Persian Gulf had been showing him gray-black water and the distant orange glow of the Karg Island gas flares through the forward bridge windows, the specific visual environment of a northern Gulf night, where the horizon was defined by the gas flare glow rather than the boundary between sea and sky. His standing order was the transit course. The course had not changed. The officer of the deck straightened his collar. The captain walked to the chart table. The encounter report would go to 5th Fleet, to the U.S. Embassy Bahrain, and to the Naval Air Systems Command Intelligence Unit that maintained the institutional assessment of IRGCN unmanned aerial system capabilities. The specific intelligence products from this encounter, the EW datalink signature log for the Mohajer 6 video downlink mode, the acoustic cross-reference methodology and its accuracy assessment, the laser Dazzler effectiveness data against an electro-optical sensor at approximately 11 nautical miles at altitude, and the Seahawk to drone searchlight illumination engagement at 4.9 nautical miles. Full encounter report to 5th Fleet. EW signature, log from first detection at 2343 through withdrawal at 0004. Acoustic cross-reference methodology, documented as an experimental technique with assessment of accuracy, laser Dazzler activation log and telemetry data rate correlation, Seahawk searchlight engagement data at 4.9 nautical miles, and both drone track histories including the approach geometry. Flagged the acoustic cross-reference technique for the Pacific Fleet Sensor Systems Assessment Unit. Unconventional, but it worked. He looked at the chart. Continue the operation. He turned toward the sea cabin. Good watch. The record assembled here speaks in the language the ocean keeps. 2 IRGCN Mohajer. 6 class unmanned aerial systems were detected operating in the northern Persian Gulf at 11:43 p.m., 1 approaching on bearing 031, 1 holding on bearing 014. Detection sequence, EW datalink emission at 11:43 p.m., acoustic cross-reference at 11:46 p.m., radar contact at 11:46 p.m., FLIR contact intermittent from 11:47 p.m., primary drone CPA before course change, converging on destroyer position approximately overhead. Post-course change CPA 1.8 nautical miles east. Course change timing correlated with Seahawk searchlight illumination at 11:55:35 p.m. Laser Dazzler activated on primary drone. Yes, at 11:53 p.m., bearing 031, range approximately 11.2 nautical miles. Measured effect, primary drone telemetry data rate reduction from 2 megabits per second to 800 kilobits per second following activation, further reduction to 200 kilobits per second following Seahawk searchlight illumination. Video downlink assessed as effectively non-functional at 200 kilobits per second. Seahawk deployment launched at 11:48 p.m., climbed to 1,500 feet, intercepted primary drone at 4.9 nautical miles, Searchlight activated at 11:55:35 p.m. Searchlight illumination correlated with drone sensor saturation. LRAD broadcast in Farsi toward drone approach bearing yes at 11:49 p.m. Secondary drone, EW detection only, maintained range throughout, began withdrawal at 11:57 p.m. Acoustic cross-reference of airborne UAV, yes, at 11:46 p.m. Method, passive acoustic sweep detection of piston engine signature at altitude. Bearing accuracy, consistent with radar and EW bearing within acceptable margin. Technique documented as experimental. Course alterations by U.S. destroyer, 0. Operation continued, yes. The moonless Persian Gulf at 11:43 p.m. held 2 drones and 1 destroyer, and the specific dark that gave one side its collection advantage. The acoustic operator found an internal combustion engine in the passive data. The laser Dazzler found a sensor at 11 nautical miles. The Searchlight found a navigation light at 4.9 miles. The darkness the IRGCN had chosen for the collection was the same darkness that made the Searchlight's 2.5 million candela the brightest thing in the northern Gulf for 30 seconds. The drone turned east. The data rate went to 200 kilobits. The record has both numbers.